On Wednesday, the PFA released its 2024-25 end-of-season report highlighting what it found across the competition. And we're here today on the Dubcast to wrap it all up for you. My name is Poletti. Joining me, as always, is Burke. And Burke, I mean, we've both read the report in full, and it's interesting reading. Is probably the best way to word it.
Yeah. I was gonna say disappointed but not surprised, but actually some of the things I was a bit surprised by. Maybe surprised isn't the best word either. Shocked. A little bit shocked. But yeah, we'll get into it. We'll get into it.
So if you haven't read the report yet, I would definitely recommend that you read the report, and we'll put a link to the report in the episode description for you to go have a look at. As I said, it is quite an interesting read, a little bit shocking, and like there were definitely some numbers in there that surprised me, such as some of the crowd attendance numbers, which include significant drop off in attendances across certain clubs, and one club really bucking the trend, which we'll get into in a moment. But we're going to start by sort of highlighting some key points out of the executive summary. So for those who don't know, an executive summary in a report is essentially highlighting the key talking points out of the report, and we'll sort of summarize that a little bit more to just to give you an idea of what to expect out of this episode as well. So some of the highlights, results from the PFA's end-of-season survey show that A-League Women has become the least preferred league globally amongst our own players. The minimum salary has gone from one of the highest among Australian women's leagues pre-COVID to the lowest. It has become more difficult to retain players and also replenish player stocks from overseas, which was predicted in last year's report, particularly with the expansion of the NWSL, as well as the introduction of the USL women's competition. The clubs are now recruiting and seeing players poached by European second, third, fourth, and fifth divisions, and we've talked a little bit about that already, in particular recently with Alana Murphy and Sarah D'Apollonia going to the Two-Frauen Bundesliga in Germany. As a result of this, the A-League Women's existing skew towards younger players became even more extreme in the 24-25 season, with the share of match minutes being played by players aged 21 and under rising to 32%, which is up 4% from the previous season, and I can imagine that number's only going to increase this season again, given that Willa Pearson's already played 180 minutes at just 14 years old. Despite total player payments reaching a record high of $8.7 million, the players' self-reported financial health continued to decline. The share of players who said their financial situations were either not at all or only slightly secure grew to 76%, which is a 10% increase from 2 years ago. The share of A-League women players who worked outside football during the season was 62%. Average crowds fell by 26% as the Women's World Cup buzz wore off last season. The market research confirmed the step up to full-time professionalism would be a driver in growing support, as has been the case in leading women's leagues abroad. The survey found 62% of Australian football fans agreed that A-League women players should be full-time professional athletes. 2 in 5 players are dissatisfied with the performance of the APL, and the players overwhelmingly support the idea of an independent commission overseeing the league, as opposed to the current board of mostly clubs at 61% supporting the independent commission and 2% supporting the current board of mostly club owners, while 1 in 6 A-League women players felt that their club posed some kind of safety risk during the 24-25 season, with the majority of these concentrated in 4 clubs. Those are some shocking numbers.
Yeah. Yeah. They're really, really horrific, honestly. And if you look just on the pay thing, if you look at the highest paid women's athletes in Australia compared to the A-League women's, which is the lowest now, honestly, what shocked me the most was that this used to be the highest paid. What do you mean? What do you mean? Uh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah. Uh, I wish I had words, and we'll go over the numbers in detail because we've picked that out as one of our 5 key talking points is the player payments and the salary cap and all that sort of thing. So we're going to go over that in detail in a few minutes' time. But our first key talking point is going to be the crowd attendances. So attendances fell 26% as the 2023 Women's World Cup buzz wore off. So I've got the numbers here in front of me. So in the 2020-21 season, the average attendance, all these numbers excluding finals, by the way, was 1,068. In the 21-22 season, it was 1,175. The 22-23 season was 1,233. Then comes the Women's World Cup. And then the 23-24 season saw 2,117 average attendance, and that has dropped last season to 1,559, which I knew there was a drop off there, and I'd sort of started to look into some of these numbers, focusing particularly on Sydney FC, and I understand Sydney FC had a down season last year. We couldn't stop talking about it here on the Dubcast for obvious reasons. But I looked at it when you look at their their attendance dropped off a little bit more than what the average is of that 26%, and I looked at it with the in junction with the departure of Courtney Vine. Right, we saw 12,000 people turn up to their opening game of the 23-24 season, which is a standalone game at Sydney Football Stadium, rivaling some of the numbers that that men's crowds have gotten at the Sydney Football Stadium for their games. And I understand it's a derby. It's the first. It was one of the first games after the World Cup had taken place. But every time I went to a Sydney FC game, anytime Courtney Vine was mentioned by the ground announcer, or she did something, or she was on the ball, it was all, everyone went up with anticipation because it was Courtney Vine, it was Courtney Vine, it was Courtney Vine. And looking at the drop-off after Courtney Vine left in crowd attendances and some of the atmosphere, I don't necessarily think it was all down to performance. As we discussed this week on the Dubcast, fans turn up because they want to support, winning teams, right? And when teams aren't winning, the crowd numbers tend to drop off. But I look at it, 41% drop in average attendance by Sydney FC. That's not all surely just down to a poor performance. Like, I really think the Courtney Vine factor had such an impact in that, Burke.
Yeah, I reckon it did too. It was, yeah. I remember seeing that crowd at that game. I think I must have watched it online or wherever. I didn't go to Sydney for it that game, and thinking, we've turned a corner. We're gonna retain audiences, guys. And then we did not. Then we pretty famously did not, actually, which sucks because we should have. And when I say we, I mean the APL. Obviously, don't mean me. I'm not physically retaining anyone anywhere, am I? Yeah, this sucks. It really sucks. Although, on the other side, there is, well, I'd say one team that's actually completely thrown this off, which is Adelaide, who had a 58% increase in their attendance. I don't know whatever they're doing, they need to give everyone else the exact steps that they've taken to make this happen. Um, yeah, but yeah, the Sydney drop off, crazy work, crazy work.
Yeah, so I shudder to think what this number would be if we take Adelaide United out of the equation.
Let's
As you
not.
said, yeah, no, let's not. So as you said, Adelaide United at 58% were one of only 2 clubs that saw a positive attendance increase from the previous season. Brisbane Roar were the other with a 1% crowd increase. Everyone else had anywhere from a 2% to a 61% decrease in crowds from season to season. Perth Glory at 2%, Wellington at 61%, and other clubs falling somewhere between 28% and 49% decrease in attendance. Canberra United, the only other club with a single percentage digit decrease at 8%. I mean, I don't know what the solution is, because I can think there's a number of factors that go into this, right? Poor timing of games, poor weather conditions, the fact that, players aren't full time, and we've talked about this already, means, as we already, it was highlighted in the executive summary, 62% of players working outside of football, so they can't give everything to football. And Tamika Yallop said this yesterday as well, is that players are being expected to be full time on part-time pay, essentially, to compete in the competition, and that's just not sustainable. And I think that shows the increases with, some of the stresses that the players are under. But I mean, even without looking at full-time professionalism, I can think of a couple of ways that you improve crowd attendances, Burke, and maybe you've got some others here as well. But I know there were multiple games last season where Sydney FC and the Western Sydney Wanderers played at the same time, and they were both playing home games. Now, I understand not everyone is a dub nuff like us, and are going to go to as many games as they possibly can, but, things like that aren't helping, I guess I would say, because you will have people who would go to both games if they could. I don't know what the Melbourne numbers were, but I think there were a couple of simultaneous games, or close enough to simultaneous, where because of the distance between Casey Fields and home of the Matildas, that they couldn't, realistically go to both games. Having games in, hot weather conditions because certain venues don't meet standards for broadcast lighting. So, I know, there have been some 4 p.m. kickoffs at McKellar Park that, were played in baking heat, that maybe that turned some fans away. I know I've been to Wanderers Football Park myself on many occasions, and some of the weather conditions there are not great. I mean, as we talked about already, a 4 p.m. kickoff on on a non-public holiday Friday afternoon, games kicking off at 4:50 p.m., 4:20 p.m. local time, like all these things, because they're double headers. That just it doesn't do anything to help crowd attendances.
Yeah, yeah, it's exactly that. It's the time of kickoff, the days of kickoff. So a 4 p.m. game on a Saturday is completely achievable. A 4 p.m. game on a Friday is not. Because, shockingly, people have jobs. And the people that don't have jobs need the people with the jobs to take them to the games. This is not rocket science. This is not rocket science. The weather's a huge one, like you already said. No one wants to go and stand in the sun for 3 hours, let alone run around in it. They're all super, it's so deeply frustrating to read to read reports like this, because every problem that they're saying the league has, we already know about. We've already spoken about. There's only so many times you can have the conversation about how stupid it is to have games kicking off at 4 p.m. or even at 5 p.m. I'm gonna lose my mind. I'm gonna lose my mind. I feel like a little rat on a little wheel, and I can't get off the wheel, and we just keep running on the little wheel, and nothing changes. I would love to get off the wheel. Please change something. Oh my God. The other thing I think that is also not a huge help is when the men's games and the women's games are scheduled at the same for the same day or around the same time. Like not even just two cities having two women's teams on at the same time. Because if you like, I know they always, and this is why they're like, oh, let's have double headers. We'll get the men's fans to be women's fans. But people don't want to spend 8 hours outside. They really don't. Um, and so then they have to pick. So do they go to the men's game? Do they go to the women's game? Do they go to the women's game or the men's game? And for a lot of men's fans, they're not going to pick the women's game over the men's game. And I don't really expect them to. Like, if they've always been a fan of the men's game, I've always been a fan of the women's game. You won't catch me at an A-League men's game. It's just not for me. But if we're going to try and be open to moving fans from just supporting the men's game to supporting both, you've got to make it so they can actually attend. Like, it's all just things that are so simple. Like, let's get some lights. Let's get some lights so we don't have to have players out on the pitch at 2 in the afternoon on a day that's like 28 degrees but feels like 32 but doesn't reach the wet bulb temperature or whatever. Like, yeah, it's just very frustrating.
Yeah, and again, I know I keep going back to Sydney FC as sort of like my reference point, but you know they are one of the two teams in the city that I reside in, the team that I have watched for the longest time. And I look at their first home game of the A League Women's season against Melbourne City in round one. The Sydney FC men's team played away that day, but they were in Newcastle, and I know a lot of fans like traveling up to Newcastle. Some of them who are fans that would watch both games, and so you're then asking fans to choose: do I go to the home game with the women, or do I go to the one of the three away days that I look forward to every single year? Because it's in a nice city, it's a good it's a good trip up the coast with mates, all that sort of thing, right? And so you're asking fans to choose as well, and I think that's something that could definitely be looked at going forward into the future. And we're going to move on to our next talking point, which was that players overwhelmingly prefer an independent commission to the APL's current board. This is page 12 of the report. If you want to have the report open as we go through our main talking points here, so you can see what we're actually looking at when we're talking about it. So, as we summarized in the executive summary, 61% of players would prefer an independent commission compared to just 2% who wanting to keep the current setup of mostly club owners on the APL board. 40% were either very dissatisfied or slightly dissatisfied with the current governance model of the A-Leagues, while it was 5% of players feel that A-League women clubs should be standalone, while 45% feel that it should be integrated, and 31% said that it depends on the club. 38% think that the A-League women should be owned and run independently of A-League men, with almost 40% unsure. I mean, we've been talking about this for quite a while. Burkers have a lot of fans and other media pundits that it just doesn't feel like what the APL is currently doing is working for the league, and I think the players clearly feel that way as well.
Yeah, yeah, overwhelmingly. The idea of the league being run by an independent commission like the AFL is or the NRL is, I think honestly would be a really good idea. And I personally think running the competition as a not for profit, the way that they do the AFL, could also be really beneficial for the league. But is anyone going to be willing to do that? They the report that they mentioned, the Crawford report in 2003, said that they would like an independent commission. So that was over 20 years ago, and they're still saying the same thing now. So, what are we doing? What are we doing? We're certainly not listening to the players, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's one of those situations, right, where when the APL took over from Football Australia, which was the clubs taking over, similar to how the Premier League has worked, to give probably the best example of that, or the most famous example of that, is that the A League women, or then the W League side of those clubs came with, right, as part of this, because everything used to be run by Football Australia. And I mean, I've seen a lot of fans essentially say that it's been treated as an add-on of sorts, where it's kind of like, okay, there are clubs out there that want the A-League men's club, and the A-League women's club is just kind of there. And I'm not necessarily saying I disagree with that. I think there are a number of clubs, and we'll touch on that a little bit later as well, who have clearly taken the one club approach properly and have made a tremendous effort of that. But then there are other clubs who at points kind of make you think that their women's team is a second thought at points. But look, we're not going to spend too much time on this one, because I think the numbers on this one speak for itself, and there's not too much of a discussion to have, but definitely felt that it was worth pointing out. Do you have anything else you wanted to add on this one, Burke?
Nah.
Fantastic. Let's move on to page 20 now. So we're going to skip over quite a little bit of this report, but it's definitely worth reading, as we're going to go to the CBA progress and record player payments. Believe a league failing to keep pace in women's sport. And you mentioned this off the top, Burke. Some of these numbers are quite shocking. So I'll give you full context here. So as we touched on off the top, pre-COVID, the A-League women had one of the highest numbers in terms of minimum player payments, and now it is the lowest amongst 6 women's leagues in the country. So for context, pre-COVID was 2020. So $16,344 for the A-League women. By comparison, the WNBL was $13,000. The Super Netball was $30,000. The NRLW was $6,000. AFLW was $16,263. And the WBBL was $11,246 minimum salary. But it should be noted that that number for the WBBL excludes a state contract, while the next numbers for the WBBL include players' contract with the state. You compare that to 2025. The A-League women is a minimum salary of $26,500. The WNBL is now just under $30,000. Super Netball is just over $45,000. NRLW is just under $42,000. AFLW is at $67,500, or just under, while the WBBL is just under $75,000, nearly 3 times what an A-League women player would be getting paid. But keeping in mind that number does include the player's contract, state contract, in the WBBL. But even then, some damning numbers.
Yeah, this table is diabolical. Just absolutely diabolical. What do you mean these women are on 35-week contracts and get paid like the minimum wage is $26,500? That is not even $1,000 a week.
Yeah. It's not good, and you look at, and again, to keep coming back to Sydney, but I know most other capital cities in the country have this issue as well. Living in these cities is not cheap, which is where the clubs are. And so is it any wonder? Like I remember when the APL did, I don't even remember what it was called, but they did like the little docu series that they did, right? And you got to the A League women episodes, and you saw 4 or 5 players living in a share house together,
Yep.
and it's no wonder with a salary like that, as I mean, I know to live close to the Sydney CBD can be around $1,000 a week in rent, for apartments and stuff like that, right? And if you choose to go in the other direction, you've then just got longer travel times, which can make getting to trainings difficult. Like you've got players they're either training early in the morning or they're training at night, because players have to work with numbers like that. And so A League men's sides, they're full time, and so you've got players who are able to just rock up to training at 9 a.m. or 10 o'clock in the morning or whatever it is, and then maybe they've got to do some community appearances and stuff like that, or they've got to go through some stuff with the club. But other than that, they're free to go about the rest of their day after that. Women's players don't get that. They've got to train, then go to work, or they've got to go to work, then come to training. It makes it very difficult to increase the quality of the product when you're in situations like that.
Yeah. I mean, I I don't even I said it before, it's just so frustrating. It is so deeply, deeply frustrating. I and they get taxed on this money as well. Like, what? There's no way that this is going to be sustainable. I'm sorry. Uh, I said it off the pod, but I'll say it like I said it before we started recording, but I'll say it now. If they don't actually get full-time professionalism after this CBA runs out, like the new one, if it doesn't have full-time professionalism, I don't know how much longer we're gonna have an actual thriving A-League women's, because you can't live like this. I mean, unless the economy crashes, then maybe you can live on $26,000. But it doesn't look like it's doing that yet. Yet. Yeah. You can't expect people to come, especially like international players. I know a lot of them will come from like other places in Asia because the quality of life in Australia is really great, but it's not that great when you're getting paid like $3 an hour, essentially. Um, but you can't expect players to be coming in from overseas, from the States, like they used to when they're getting paid dirt and they could stay home and they could play in the second tier of the US League. They could play in the NWSL. They could even go to Canada. We have players going to Canada. Why? Because Canada is more appealing than our own league because they pay them real money.
Yeah, so
But
this is something that Dylan Holmes touched on as well, on Tuesday afternoon, before the report came out, was that with the players on 35-week contracts, in addition to the minimum salary only being $26,500, it also means that players can't necessarily do any promotion during the off season that's sanctioned by the club. So they can't go to NPL games, they can't do all these sorts of things without the clubs paying on a per hour basis. And I'm not too sure what that number is off the top of my head, but Holmes said that there's some clubs who just can't put that into their budget, and so you're in a situation where Matilda's game in July, a perfect example of this, right? The A-League women players aren't under contract, so if Perth Glory wanted to have some of their A-League women players appear at these Matilda's games, do fan drives, meet and greets, stuff like that to try to help drive the promotion of their membership numbers, they'd have to pay the players on a per hour basis. That is, I think, part of the broader issue as well. But one other thing that I wanted to highlight here in the report, Was that the A-League women's salary cap will increase to 640k for the 2025-26 season rather than the previously agreed 600k. The salary floor will rise to 520,000 as previously agreed. But the PFA cannot, in good faith, report on this salary cap change under the pretense that it was decided in a normal or appropriate way. The APL apparently took the decision internally sometime in June and notified clubs in early July. It was only in October that the PFA became aware of the APL's intention to make the change. The APL has apologised for not communicating with the PFA sooner, but this misses the point. The change the salary cap is to amend the CBA. If the APL wishes to amend the CBA, their first call, not their last, must be to the PFA and the players. The same applies in both directions, and regardless of whether the positions are likely to be supported by the other party, the APL continues to demonstrate a concerning lack of understanding of and respect for the fundamental importance of collective bargaining. The change itself is a step in the right direction while falling well short of what the PFA believes is required. Given the choice of accepting or blocking the change after clubs had completed their recruitment, the PFA and the players consented. The APL's rationale for the change includes accommodating the uplift in minimum salaries, keeping pace with other leagues, and remaining competitive in Asia. I thought that was interesting that the APL made the decision to go against the CBA and change the salaries there. I thought that was interesting that they did it without consultation with the PFA, which shows a willingness for the APL and the league to make changes which, given what we know and what this report highlights in terms of full-time professionalism, means that maybe the CBA could have been renegotiated during the last off-season. Maybe some of these changes could have been brought forward instead of having to wait for the CBA to expire at the end of this season.
Yeah, that paragraph really irritated me. So what, you're telling me there is more money? You're telling me there can be more money? You're telling me there can be more money and you'll give more money and you won't tell the players' union that there's more money? Who does that? It feels, well, it's incredibly underhanded. Like, it's just doing backdoor deals with the clubs instead of the actual employees. It doesn't feel right. It's not right, but it feels worse than that. It feels like something very, very bad is happening behind the scenes if they're not contacting the union that represents their employees. Also the line where it's like, we're trying to keep on par with other leagues. Who? Other leagues in Asia? We should not be. We don't have the same cost of living as they do in other countries. And that is not meant to be like a derogatory statement. That is literally a fact of the matter. It's a very high cost of living in Australia. You might be having equivalent wages to other leagues in Asia, but they don't have the same cost of living as we do. So that line is just stupid to me. Like, okay, let's have the same pay that they have for a league in China. Why would we consent to having the same pay? Why should they have the same pay as other leagues in Asia when they can go to Canada and get more than twice that? When they can go to the US, when you've got players from here willingly going to second tier, third tier, fourth, whatever tier it is. Is it the second tier in Germany that you mentioned
Yes.
before?
Yes.
Like, I understand we play in Asia. We're in Asia. We play in Asia. That doesn't mean we need to compete with them across the board. We can do more. We should do more. They should have been doing more. I'm very annoyed about that. But I have a background in unions, so anything that's done badly towards unions is always gonna annoy me. Yeah. Yeah, it's just felt like a weird, like, oh no, see, we care about you. We can do this behind your back. And so you'll have to agree to it because it's better now and we've already done it. Like, that's not how bargaining works at all, I don't think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the last thing that I wanted to highlight from this particular section as well, before we move on, if you scroll down, if you're reading along as you're listening to us talk about this, if you scroll down to the very next page, which is page 21, right at the top, from an end of season survey, an anonymous A-League women player, quote, sick of having to balance work and football during soccer seasons, makes me want to be back in AFLW where you can just be an elite athlete. And I think given what we know about how the AFL treats the AFL women's competition, I think that's a pretty damning indictment
They
on
only play
the state
10
of
regular
pay.
season games
Yeah,
in the AFLW. They play 10 regular season games and then they have a final series. They don't even play every single team once. And players would rather do that than be here. And how do you even manage a job at the same time as this? You'd have to be the most casual of casual workers because you constantly have interstate trips, you constantly have trainings, you constantly have games. Just,
either that or you need to have a very flexible workplace who understands certain things. I think back to when Sophie Harding got
yeah.
got her call up to the Matildas in
She was on
early
shift, wasn't
24.
she?
Yeah, she was in the middle of a 10
Yeah.
hour shift when she got the call.
Yeah.
Like, I think that says a lot. Um, I wanted to move on now to page 27 of the report, heat and scheduling. Cooling in change rooms is required to supplement the A-League women's heat approach. So extreme heat remains an ongoing challenge for the summer-bound A-League women. Players reported experiencing extreme heat in 23% of the fixtures where a post-match survey was completed, which was 68% of all regular season matches. As the PFA has previously reported, the A-League women tends to be more susceptible to extreme heat than the A-League men because its matches are usually scheduled earlier in the day and its facilities are not as advanced. And we've seen this plenty of times previously where games have either been postponed completely because they were part of double headers, or they've had the women's game moved until after the men's game because playing a game at 2 o'clock in the afternoon was not sustainable. I can think of one instance where that happened off the top of my head, where it was a Melbourne City doubleheader, and the women's game was moved until after the men's game. And I vaguely recall the broadcast cutting out at some point during that game as well, because of the change in time. So I think that that is not great. Among the players who reported extreme heat, 15% said there was not sufficient shade on the bench and 38% said there was not sufficient cooling in the change rooms. A quarter said their match should have been postponed and 70% said the weather impacted on players' performance. 1 in 5 said they or a teammate experienced health problems resulting from the conditions. This is not anything that we haven't talked about before. It's not something, sadly, that is unique to the A-League women. There were a couple of high-profile instances in the NWSL this year around heat issues as well. One of them was in a Seattle-Portland game, which took place on a synthetic pitch. There was another one with a match in Kansas City that kicked off 3.5 hours after its schedule because of heat, with local media reporting that 16 people at the stadium were treated for heat-related issues, with one taken to hospital. The Athletic reported that the NWSL commissioner rejected the club's pre-match request to move the game and threatened to fine the club, Kansas City Current, for bumping the match out of a lucrative broadcast slot. The NWSL Players Association reportedly flagged the match as a heat risk with the league when it received the draft schedule in January. Looking at some of the numbers as well, so looking at some of those 68% games surveyed, was there a drinks break during the match? 88% came back as yes. Was there sufficient cooling in the change rooms? Only 62% were yes. Did the weather conditions impact on players' performance? 70% said yes, and 19%, as I already touched on, have you or a teammate experienced any health problems resulting from the weather conditions during a match? And 19% saying yes. We know this is an issue. We know that climate change isn't going anywhere, Burke. We know that this is only going to continue to become an issue. This just isn't good enough.
Yeah, this is insane. This is insane. That first response, the was there a drinks break during the match, 88% saying yes, that in itself already tells you that the game should not have been played. Sorry. Shouldn't have happened. Yeah, we shouldn't be playing games that need to have a direct break in play so everyone can, have a drink of water and not collapse from like heat stroke on the pitch. But it doesn't matter because people are still having health problems after these games. The lack of air conditioning in the change rooms. Nope. No. Imagine that. Imagine you're already having had run around for 45 minutes, and now you and all the other people that have run around for 45 minutes have to go sit in a room that has no air conditioning. If you're not from Australia and for some reason, thank you, you're listening to this pod, buildings here are not made for heat. Just in general, really. So when you get hot inside, it's like impossible to cool them down. Putting just like a fan in a room with a group of people that have been running around for 45 minutes in the sun, it's not safe. It's not fair. It's not right. Every time we talk about the heat thing, I always think about that one game in Adelaide that was a double header. I think it was last season, where the men's team played first and the women's team played second. And all of a sudden, there were all of these articles and all of this chatter about how bad the game was because it was so hot and how hard it must have been. And I could not believe it. I could not believe it. Oh, so now we care. Now we care about the heat. Now we think it's affecting the product.
Yeah.
Imagine being a woman. Imagine being a woman.
Yep. I can't disagree with what you've just said. I'll pull out some of the quotes here as well. This one from an away player at the home of the Matildas. Extreme heat was definitely felt. Perceived was not as bad due to the wind. There were a lot of reports of heat-related fatigue during the end of the match, and also quite a few reports of people feeling ill after the game and even back at the hotel. Then in brackets, nauseous, exhaustion. From an away player at Perry Park, quote, change rooms lacked ability to cope with the humidity. It was more humid in the change room than outside despite efforts with portable fans. An away player at Woy Woy Oval. Oh, sorry, go on, Burke.
Sorry, I work in retail. One of the things I do is sell fans in the summertime. And the first thing I tell any customer that comes in looking for a fan, this is not going to cool down your room. Do you know what a fan does? It blows the air around that's already in the room. If you want cold air in a room, you need to get an air conditioner. Nothing else will suffice. And you're especially not going to be able to put an evaporative cooler in Brisbane. Like that's not going to work. You need air conditioning. That's my rant. Sorry, I'm just going to continue having this rant all summer long, mostly to customers, but please continue.
Speaking of air conditioning, quote from an away player at Woy Woy Oval, no air conditioning or fan in the change room, got very hot. And then an away player at Leichhardt Oval, the change room, quote, the change rooms are extremely hot, worse than outside temp, and we only had a single fan to blow that air around. Cannot imagine how bad it gets in 30 plus degree weather. And I think this goes back to other parts of the report as well that talk about how outdated some of the facilities are at some of these venues. I know Woy Woy Oval had to be used by the Mariners women last year because Gosford Stadium, Central Coast Stadium, was undergoing some surface relaying works. But Leichhardt Oval is Sydney FC's home ground for its A-League women's side. That quote says, that some of the facilities aren't up to scratch, and I know that they're in the council and state government in the process of, getting some renovations done to it, but, this is a side that's playing there now. This was a side that had to, Unite Round last season had to move away from Leichhardt Oval because of pitch concerns. The club had to move several games away from Leichhardt Oval because of just pitch concerns, let alone the change rooms themselves. Is there anything else you wanted to add on this, Burke, or can we move on to our last key talking point?
I hate that we have to have this conversation almost every week. Stop this. Just buy a portable air conditioner. Oh my God. I'll give you a discount. Whatever club, if you want a portable aircon, reach out. I don't care. I'll do you a deal. Please. Stop making these people suffer.
I'm not going to dox Burke, but I will tell you that one of the places where she works is that the slogan used to be "Pay less, pay cash." That's all I'll say.
You've doxed me. It's over.
But which store? That is the question.
This is true. There is many a store. Come see me. I will do a deal. Oh my God, please. Listen, can you imagine sitting in a room with just a fan going in the middle of summer? Just doing that, even if you haven't done any running, sucks.
I'm going through it right now as I don't know if I talked about this on the podcast, but there used to be a tree in my neighbour's backyard that completely fell over, and so now instead of having the nice shade in summer that I used to have, I've now got the sun beating down where I have my computer and everything set up. So yes, I have to run I already have to run my air conditioner a lot more than I did this time last year. So I can't imagine what it would be like to actually be playing games in those sorts of issues. The last thing we're going to talk about is the safety part of the report, which is on page 33. Several A-League women club environments raised significant safety concerns. 1 in 6 A-League women players felt that their club environment posed some kind of safety risk during the 24-25 season, with the majority of these concentrated at 4 clubs. The 16% of A-League women players was higher than the 9% of A-League men players who felt their club environment posed a safety risk. 4 A-League women teams had over 30% of their players flagging a risk, while no more than 21% of any A-League men team flagged a risk. To be clear, the end-of-season survey question is broad and purposely cast in the wide net. A follow-up question asked players who reported the risk to explain what it was. This question is made optional for participants' safety. Risks identified range from low to high and include physical and psychological types. The PFA is not implying that clubs with players identifying risks has allowed a critical failure, and the PFA attempts to work through these results with every club to highlight issues and seek solutions. Rather, we are publishing these results to highlight a trend, particularly in comparison with the A-League men results. Inside largely the same set of clubs, women players are reporting feeling at risk at nearly double the rate of their men's counterparts. There is a systemic issue where the lower investment into and prioritization of women's programs is leading to, on average, inferior infrastructure, poorer conditions, insufficient staffing, and less oversight. And the question highlighted from the end-of-season surveys in the report: at any time did you feel that your club environment posed a risk to your physical or mental safety? Only 2 clubs have been named in response to this question. That is Canberra United and the Central Coast Mariners, both of whom had 0% recorded as the response by the players. The other numbers, all clubs of which have been unnamed, range from 5% to 35%, with the 4 clubs over 30% coming in at 31, 32, 33, and that 35%. I don't even know where to go with this.
I do. This is unacceptable. It is unacceptable to even have 5% of your time be feeling that you're at risk to your physical or mental safety. No one in any way, shape, or form at their job should have a risk to their physical or mental safety. I mean, I do frequently, but that's because I work with customers, and that's just a guarantee. But you shouldn't. You shouldn't. You shouldn't. And the fact that the number goes as high as 35%, that, no, no, immediately no. I obviously understand that it is the broad question that they ask intentionally. So, yes, maybe they are saying that the mental safety risk was that they had to deal with some unpleasant characters, much like I do. Doubt they were as bad as mine, though. No one's as bad as customer service. Um, but yeah, it could be anything as slight as that. But the fact that it's getting up to 35% is really telling me it's not that slight. It's absolutely not. The fact that it's also double the amount that the men's players are experiencing, this is an absolute failure and an indictment on all of the clubs except for Canberra and Central Coast. Congratulations to Canberra and Central Coast for doing the bare minimum.
I've got absolutely nothing else to that. This was just one page of the report, so there's not really too much more to talk about. All the other sections had multiple pages to talk about, but I still felt it was incredibly important to highlight. So those are the key talking points that we've picked out of the report. But as I said off the top, there is, all 36 pages of this report are worth reading. I would heavily recommend, if you have a chance to read it, that you do so. And we'll put the link to the report in the description, as we already touched on. Certainly not one of the more pleasant episodes we've recorded of the Dubcast, Burke, but a necessary one all the same.
Yeah, don't make me do this again. They need to fix the CBA. Don't make me have to do this again.
So we're not going to record an episode when next year's report comes out?
Well, no, we won't have to, because they're going to have magically fixed everything and I won't have anything to complain about.
If only it was that simple. If only it was that simple. But hopefully when we do this next year, we'll be talking about a CBA that will see full-time professionalism across
We better be.
across the A-League women. But that will do it for this episode of the Dubcast, part of the Roundball Australia podcast network. As always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you aren't already. Hit the little notification bell so that you get notified whenever we drop a new episode on whatever platform you're watching on. But we'll be back next week on Wednesday to chat all things from round 3 of the A-League women, as well as Melbourne City's exploits in Asia, as they will be 2/3 of the way through the group stage of their Asian Women's Champions League campaign. But for Burke, my name is Poletti. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week.